Dene, the people, the Navajo, have mastered the desert Southwest through time and space. Far before European and Spanish contact, Navajo people migrated into the American Southwest between 200 and 1100 AD. During this time, Navajos developed complex trade networks with Puebloan people. The sharing of new goods and technologies with Pueblo agriculturalists spread rapidly through the Four Corners and slowly became a new cultural norm. In return, Pueblos would share floodwater farming techniques and unique weaving patterns which are still practiced in modernity. In the 16th century, Navajos came into contact with Spanish immigrants who wanted to expand their territory. Expansion brought sickness, slavery, and atrocity to Navajo and Pueblo people. When Pueblo people revolted against the Spanish, both Apache and Navajo groups fought the war for independence. This rebellion forced the Spanish back into Mexico until 1693. Shortly after, the desire for conquest reared its ugly head once more. This time, the Spanish conquered the Rio Grande Valley, thus forcing Pueblo and Navajo people into refuge. During this second conquest, the Spanish introduced domestic livestock such as sheep, goats, and horses. In the 18th century, Navajos came into direct conflict with Spanish forces. The Spanish were not alone. Forming alliances with fierce Comanche warriors and Ute people, Navajos fell victim to the Spanish slave trade. Even in turmoil, Navajos carried on their traditions and practices. Red cloth imported from Europe to Spain, then Mexico, and into the American Southwest were now incorporated into Navajo blankets and textiles. Some groups of Navajos would strip Spanish camps and settlements from this precious red cloth, making the material extremely valuable not only back then, but in modern times. Make no mistake, the Navajo did not just lay down and take Spanish conquest. Navajo warriors were excellent horsemen and took their fair share of victories. Fierce fighting tactics were conducted towards enemy forces. However, in 1863, the culmination of hostile forces grew with the U.S. Army under the command of Kit Carson. Hundreds of Navajo people died, women, men, and children. The long walk took place as Navajos were pushed off of their traditional lands and were forced into Fort Sumter. In 1868, a treaty allowed the Navajo to return to their homeland, and the Navajo Reservation was born. Reservation life during this time included farming, raising livestock, silversmithing, bow crafting, weaving, and much, much more. Today, the Navajo Reservation is one of the largest in the United States. Cultural tradition is still practiced in a booming tourist market, and code talkers during World War II are still honored and remembered for their contribution in helping the United States win the war. Hundreds of years ago, Navajo people would step onto wild lands just like I'm on today in search for wild game, big game that they can bring home to their family for much needed subsistence and nutrition. Deer, bear, elk, pronghorn, mountain lion, bobcat, you name it, they would bring it home. Their bows were often very, very heavy in weight, sending the arrow completely through the animal from one side to the other. In this video, I want to take you step by step in recreating and reproducing the Navajo style bow. Okay, so here is the stave that I'll be working with to craft this Navajo style bow. This is a really nice wood species. This is a very hard, dense piece of wood. This is oak. It's a beautiful stave, top quality to make a bow with. So there's a few different characteristics that I look for when selecting bow wood. The first thing, I want minimum twist. And in this case, you can see it's nice and straight. I don't see any twist with the naked eye. We'll know more once we remove this outer bark, but so far so good. Minimum knots. I have 2 knots. I have 1 knot right here, and then I have a very small pin knot cluster. I don't know how far down this knot goes. Once again, we'll find out once we remove this outer bark. This pin knot cluster, very likely shallow within the first or even second ring. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. Same thing with this knot up here. We'll know more once again as we remove the bark. By far the most important characteristic is straight parallel grain. If the grain runs off from one side to the other, you then have to sinew back the bow. What ends up happening if you have those grain runoffs without a sinew backing, as you pull that string back and you tiller the bow, the grain will lift up, the bow will break. The best way to find out if the grain is straight is, of course, by removing the bark. The second best way is by examining the bark. If the bark runs straight, it runs vertical from tip to tip, you know that that grain follows suit. In this case, as you can see, from tip to tip, this grain is nice and vertical and parallel to this stave. I know that this grain is also parallel and straight. So at this point, I want to take the stave to the workbench. We'll remove this outer bark very carefully and expose this first single growth ring from tip to tip. That becomes the back of the bow. Let's get to work. Carefully removing the outer bark on this stave is a tedious task. As soon as the bow maker rushes this process, the chance of violating a growth ring increases, and the craftsman is then forced to either sinew back the bow or chase a new ring. Okay, so as you can see from tip to tip, I have one continuous growth ring followed. It was very easy just removing the outer bark, the cambium layer. There's little spots of cambium layer on top. That's no big deal. But very simplistic process to chase that growth ring by simply removing the bark. The nice thing about this stave is you can see I have a little bit of setback in this handle and these limbs are pushed forward. So that's going to help me out with this back set handle in this Navajo style bow. So good thing with this stave, and it definitely works to my advantage. So we will take it. Now, I want to cover the measurement system and the profile, the design of this bow that I have etched on the surface of the back of the stave. But keep in mind, with Navajo bows that I've worked with and examined in the archaeological record from the 18 and 1900s, there's a lot of variation in style and design, especially when it comes to the width of their bows. I've seen as little as 7/8 of an inch wide, all the way up to 1.5 inches in total width, and everything in between. So it shows you that from maker to maker, there was different preferences, different styles, different designs to suit that individual hunter and shooter. So I went with a total of 1.25 inches wide. As you can see here, my total width with these vertical marks. And to cover this measurement system, it's very easy. So all I do is I measure from tip to tip on this stave and I divide that in half. That becomes my center horizontal mark. In the center of the handle, I follow 2 inches on both sides. So 2 inches on this side and then 2 inches on this side. Off of that center mark, I have a 4-inch handle area. Then I find the center of this stave running vertical and I create a mark, snap a line, and trace that out from tip to tip. That becomes my center vertical mark from tip to tip. And that's really important because that is what we're measuring off of to create this total width, this 1.25 inch width. So then on both limbs, on both sides, so as you can see, I have horizontal tick marks on the top of the stave all the way up, and on the bottom of this stave all the way up on both limbs. Every 2 inches I measure and mark those horizontal tick marks. From there, off this center line, I find 1.25 inches, and I'll make vertical marks on both limbs every 2 inches and just trace those all the way up to 7 inches. So from the 7-inch mark, that is where my tips begin to taper towards the top of the stave. So let's take a look at these tips. What I've done off this center mark, this center vertical line, is I found a 1/4 inch on one side and then a 1/4 inch on the other side. I have 1/2 inch tips. Nice narrow tips create a very fast bow. From there, I just trace a nice even taper from one mark to the edge and then from the other mark to the edge of the bow. So I find, once again, that 1.25 inch width, and I just trace that taper right to the edge on both tips. And that becomes my layout of this Navajo style bow. Let's take this stave to the workbench, start following this measurement system by removing mass. We'll also remove belly mass. We'll get this stave looking like a bow. You know, one thing about oak that really sets it apart from other hardwood species such as ash, Osage orange, hickory, or what's right beside me, hackberry, is the bend curve is so drastic, meaning you can work the belly side and all of a sudden, just like that, the limbs start to bend. So you'll notice a little bit of bounce, you'll remove more mass, and the limbs quickly start to bend. So this wood in particular forces you to slow down and pay close attention to the fine details of bow crafting, which is not a bad thing. Again, different wood species require different approaches, and oak is no different. So I removed a lot of mass on this belly side with the hatchet, the draw knife, and a little bit with my Shinto rasp, but I need to really slow down, and that's why I'm using my Shinto rasp. The nice thing about the Shinto rasp is, once again, we have 2 sides with hacksaw blade-like configurations. One side is aggressive, and then we flip it over, and the other side is not so aggressive. It's like using a file. So that's what I'm using to remove this belly mass at this point, and you can see we have quite a bit of thickness still in these limbs, but that's not a big deal because I'm starting to get a bit of bounce. These limbs are starting to bounce. I followed that measurement system, and it is looking like a bow. So what I'm doing right now is just floor tillering this stave. Once I get a floor tiller, we'll proceed to the next step. But again, using a scraper or a rasp at this moment is going to be my best approach. So we'll continue to work.
Once the limbs begin to bend, the bow is clamped down into a form. Dry heat is then applied to increase the backset into the handle. Both limbs are then toasted to derive moisture from the wood that accumulates in a high humidity environment.
The backset on this handle is exactly where I need it to be. This is a shallow double curve design and shape, and my heat corrections are set into place. Now with oak, you really want to let it cool, so I let this cool for 3 days because oak does tend to hold the heat a lot longer than other bow woods. I've got these limbs bending pretty nice and even, and the areas that I still need to focus on are about mid-limb to 4.5 inches below these string knocks. on both limbs. So right in here on both limbs, those are the areas that I need to work on. We'll continue removing that belly mass with the Shinto rasp until I can get this strung to full brace height. But not bad. We're slowly making progress with this self bow.
A bow's design will dictate its purpose. If the craftsman is looking for a longer draw and more elasticity, applying sinew to the back will help achieve this goal. On the other hand, if one is wanting an all-season bow that will perform well in wet weather, the stick bow without a backing becomes the best choice.
You know, one thing about bow making, and specifically within the same wood species, there are some woods that will flex really easy and then others that just want to remain stiff throughout the entire process until that limb becomes real thin. And that's what I'm facing with this particular piece of lumber. And the thing that really works against my advantage is this double curve design and profile, the shape of the bow. When we have a back set handle and these limbs are pushed forward, it adds more stiffness on both limbs. So more work has to be done to achieve a full brace height. So what I'm going to do is take a different approach. We will continue removing equal amounts of belly mass on both limbs, but I'm also going to start narrowing this profile and following this straight grain. So by then, once we get a narrower profile, we continue to remove belly mass, surely we'll be able to string this bow up at full brace height. Just a different approach, but nonetheless, I'm confident we'll be able to string this up just shortly.
Navajo bow makers were excellent craftsmen. Some of the most skilled and high-status individuals carried bows made of sinew and horn. These short bows were extremely powerful and could send an arrow through an animal at a very high rate of speed. On the other hand, the sinew-backed and standard stick bow was very common for Navajo people to make and carry, as they are much easier to craft with more availability and material resources.
And here we are. The bow is now strung. My initial thoughts, not too bad. I have this just about full brace height. This limb is stiff right in here. So right in here, right outside of the fades. Once again, about 5.5, 6 inches from the tip, I see this is still remaining flat on this tie end. This limb's bending pretty even. I do see a little bit of stiffness through here. But the bow is flexing, and I have flex in the handle, which I like with these double curve designs. So we will now enter into the final tillering process. Looking good. Now with most bow woods, you'll see me using a knife blade to scrape the limbs. That really isn't the case with oak. I continue using that non-aggressive side on the Shinto rasp in conjunction with the sandpaper to smooth things out. That's the best combination with this dense, hard piece of wood. We still got a ways away before I get this at full draw length.
One of the best qualities in life is patience, followed by perseverance. The slow process of crafting a bow allows me to think of the most important things in this life. As a Navajo proverb says, thoughts are like arrows. Once released, they strike their mark. Guard them well, or one day you just might be your own victim.
After working both limbs in the handle area, right behind me we have the bow on a tillering tree, and this pulley system comes in handy because I can see what areas are weak and what areas are stiff, if any. We'll take a look at the bend profile and start marking this bow. That's at 13 inches, 13 and a half. And I'm seeing all right here, this is stiff, right in here. So I need to work the fade through the mid limb. And then on this left limb, on this side, right in here, that's stiff. So those are my two focus areas when examining the profile on this tillering tree. After carefully tillering the bow and removing wood from both limbs, the bend profile becomes balanced. The goal with this project was to make and produce a Navajo bow collected from George Hubbard Pepper in the early 1900s. The end result is a very close copy. So now it's time to weigh this bow. Once again, using the pulley scale, I have it set to 0, and we will pull to 22.5 inches of draw. And hopefully we hit a good hunting weight. 45, 50 pounds would be great. That's always the goal. All right, we are, it's like 48 pounds on the dot. So that's a good weight. Now we'll take it down to the archery range and shoot this bow in. After months of shooting the Navajo style bow in 2 different environments, humidity is not conducive with this type of bow. However, when shooting it in a dry climate, the bow becomes an entirely different animal. The limbs feel physically lighter and the arrow cast becomes much faster. In the end, if this wood species did not work well, surely archaeological examples would not exist.